Thank you for tuning in to The Journey. I am Bob Glaze, President and General Manager of Southwest Radio Church, and with me is Pastor Larry Spargimino. We tell the news the way it should be told, from the perspective of sacred Scripture. Around the holiday season, we see panhandlers asking for a handout. Especially in this frigid weather, we feel compassion for such individuals and reach for our wallets. But how would you feel if you give generously and the panhandler chews you out for being stingy?
This is how the United States feels about the United Nations and its almost unanimous disapproval of President Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. As the largest donor to the UN by far, and a provider of foreign aid to dozens of other UN member states, the United States should have some respect and privilege in the decisions of the world body. Yet for decades, the United States has been stymied by its voting rivals, China and Russia, by terrorist regimes such as Iran, and by the UN leadership, which apparently regards the United States as a rogue nation. The UN is like a spoiled child who complains its allowance has not been paid on time, and like a spoiled child has forgotten that those dollars are charity and not earned income.
John Moody, Executive Vice President and Executive Editor for Fox News, has well said, quote, "The UN is a toothless, almost furless tiger. Its resolution of outrage and disapproval count for precisely nothing." Trump is not the first president to speak aloud about the ingratitude of the UN. He may, however, be the first to do something about it. Close quotes.
Nikki Haley, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, delivered a fierce rebuke to the international body. She said that the United States is the single largest contributor to the UN, something that might soon change. Quote, "We'll be honest with you. When we make generous contributions to the UN, we also have a legitimate expectation that our goodwill is recognized and respected." Close quotes.
A few days later, U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley announced a $285 million slash in the UN budget for 2018-19. Announcing it is a big step in the right direction, Haley said. This is a historic reduction in the UN biennial operating budget. Quote, "The inefficiency and overspending of the United Nations are well known," Haley said. "We will no longer let the generosity of the American people be taken advantage of or remain unchecked." Close quotes.
In the last several decades, the United States has been sucked into a globalist whirlpool. We're being drawn away from our national sovereignty into a globalist New World Order. NATO, the UN, GATT, NAFTA, and the WTO, and many other acronyms signal the startling trend weakening our national ability to maintain our way of life. There is a persistent drive to bring the United States under the authority of multinational treaties, organizations, and courts of law. This is all part of a diabolical plan to make the United States a third-rate nation, one of many in a globalist utopia. The only problem, globalism does not produce a utopia.
When the globalist leeches suck our blood until our national will and resolve is withered like last summer's garden, we will no longer be able to defend ourselves or anyone else. It will be a simple case of a few internationalists taking over the planet, ignoring liberty and justice and washing away the rule of law as one washes stains out of a dirty garment. A government of the people, by the people, and for the people will be ancient history. Perhaps few will mind as much as the population smokes pot and carouses in the bushes while we all wait to be deleted by globalist bureaucrats.
Most American presidents, including Republicans, have been slowly bringing America into global quicksand. The only exception is Donald Trump. He doesn't think erasing national borders will help America, or anyone else for that matter. Whatever you may think of Donald Trump, he is seeking to maintain American sovereignty because he sees the danger of globalism. No wonder the globalists hate him and never miss an opportunity to excoriate him. He is their enemy. We should all be thankful that this mad rush into a new world order has been slowed down somewhat. Globalism tramples the individual, individual rights, states' rights, the rights of private conscience are all bad ideas for the globalists. No wonder the globalists hate Trump. He has rebuked their darling, the United Nations.
Trump's respect for Israel also aggravates the globalists. Israel is, without doubt, the most hated nation in the world, judging from the condemnations of the Jewish state by the United Nations Human Rights Council between 2006, when it was established, and 2015. During that time period, Israel was condemned 61 times, yet terrorist nations were not condemned anywhere near that number. Syria was condemned 15 times, North Korea and its monstrous regime of death only 8 times, and Iran and its bloody Ayatollahs only 5 times. Consider the horrible record of human rights violations in Cuba, China, Pakistan, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Somalia, and Venezuela, yet not a single one of these states was condemned by the UN. But in the same period of time, Israel was condemned 61 times.
Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East. It provides the highest standards of freedom and dignity for all citizens, both Jew and Arab. There is not one Arab country in the world that will allow Jews to be citizens. And there is not one, no, not one, that will allow freedom of religion for Jews and Christians, yet it is Israel that is repeatedly condemned. There is a sinister, dark, lying spirit that is at work in the United Nations, as in all global organizations that have aspirations of world domination.
If you don't think we are moving on the fast track to world government, just look at history. 1913, the League of Nations was formed. 1919, the Council of Foreign Relations was born. 1922, the Council of Foreign Relations endorses world government and proclaims that it is desperately needed. 1945, the United Nations was formed. 1948, the World Constitution is drafted, providing a World Council to enforce world law and calls upon nations to surrender their arms to a world government. 1988, Mikhail Gorbachev speaks of a new world order. 1990, George Bush Sr. speaks of a new world order. 1992, the Earth Summit is held and produces the Biodiversity Treaty and Agenda 21. 2000, the Earth Charter is created, establishing a new universal law. The Bible is clear and proven by the history of the 20th and 21st centuries. One day, perhaps soon, the entire planet will be under the control of world government. Christians know it as the government of the Antichrist.
The present slap in the face from the UN is a clear declaration of what the purveyors of world government think of America's values. If we were dependent on the graces of world government and had surrendered our military and our values, we would be trampled upon. No, let me personalize that. You would be trampled upon. Your gun rights would be dismissed. Your Christian organizations would be trashed. Christian radio and TV would be shut down, and good Christian people would be longing for the good old days when we had borders and a military that could protect us. In 1991, Brock Chisholm, director of the UN's World Health Organization, reached the following appalling conclusion, quote, "To achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family, traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas," close quotes. Whatever denials your left-wing friends may give, the core premise of the New World Order is aptly summarized in the Rothschild publication The Economist in its cover story of June the 28th, 1991, titled "The World Order Changeth," quote, "There should, however, be no illusion that a global police force run by a global democracy is feasible. Those who have carried the winning ideas to the top of the mountain and now wish to spread them will not allow this process to be vetoed," close quotes.
Globalism is spelled D-E-A-T-H. I'm not surprised at that. Globalism brings bondage and it brings death. What is somewhat shocking is how people who call themselves Christians vote for candidates who are working hard to destroy the very fabric of American life. Their motto must be, "Make America miserable again." We well remember the September 2000 photos of Barack Obama. During the singing of the national anthem, he chose not to put his hand over his heart. He must be related to Colin Kaepernick. Representative Jack Kingston said this, quote, The famous picture of him standing with Bill Richardson and Hillary Clinton, who have their hands over their hearts, saluting the flag during the pledge, and Obama has his hands deliberately down. This is disturbing to me." Close quotes.
Now let's put all of this together and tie a few loose strings. April 2008, Obama speaks disrespectfully of Christians, saying they cling to guns or religion and have an antipathy to people who aren't like them. January 2009, on his first day in office, Obama lifts restrictions on U.S. government funding for groups that provide abortion services abroad, forcing taxpayers to fund pro-abortion groups that either promote or perform abortions in other nations. February 2009, Obama announces plans to revoke conscience protection for health workers who refuse to participate in medical activities that go against their beliefs, and fully implements the plan in February 2011. We could continue until it's time for a midnight snack, but we don't have to. It's clear. Something is afoot. Something smells bad, and it is not Gorgonzola cheese. Our society has changed, at least a large portion of it. Apart from Christians living and believing like Christians and calling on God for an earth-shaking revival, you can kiss liberty and freedom goodbye.
The globalists are fearmongers. If we don't go along with their globalist aspirations, we are going to blow each other up, and the climate is going to get warmer and warmer until all the glaciers melt and the Florida Everglades and Okefenokee Swamp become like the Sahara Desert. When President Trump refused to go along with the Paris Climate Accord, the doomers and gloomers forecast global disaster. The accord, which was sponsored by the United Nations, was supposed to slow the globe's rising temperatures. One left-wing professor said this means that, quote, "the country that is most responsible for climate change has reneged on its promise to be part of the solution," close quotes. Yet many credentialed scientists agree that the Paris Accord was a sham. Even if all the nations of the world signed on and abide by its provisions, the planet's temperature may be, notice the words may be, lowered 0.3 of a degree centigrade by 2050. A few years ago, John Coleman, the founder of the Weather Channel, wrote, quote, "It is the greatest scam in history. I am amazed, appalled, and highly offended by it. Global warming is a scam," close quotes.
We have a special offer for those who want to find out more about globalism, the New World Order, and Bible prophecy. We would like to send you Pastor Billy Crone's informative and information-packed book, The Final Countdown, Volume 2. It speaks about 10 prophetic signs given by God that would appear on the world scene before the return of Jesus Christ. There are chapters on one world government, one world religion, one world economy, and many more. Learn how the United Nations fits into the picture. 10 prophetic signs evident in the world today. Our toll-free number is 1-800-652-1144. Like it or not, we are headed for the final countdown. One of the main reasons why Christians are unaware of what is happening around them and destroying their freedoms is that there is so little teaching of Bible prophecy. Know your Bible. Study Bible prophecy. Be alert to the times. 1-800-652-1144. In October of 2017, California Governor Jerry Brown signed SB 54, a historic state law that thumbs his state's nose at federal authority. Beginning in January of 2018, California officially became a so-called sanctuary state. Many California residents are outraged. The state of California is not only protecting accused, but also convicted criminals and keeps them out of reach of federal immigration authorities. Instead of helping Immigration and Customs Enforcement to repatriate felons after their release, sanctuary legislation deliberately protects them from ICE and releases them so they can roam the streets and commit more crimes. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement webpage states this, quote, ICE's primary mission is to promote homeland security and public safety, Close quotes. The people of any nation, state, or municipality rightly expect, in return for their payment of taxes, that the government would supply a certain measure of protection for all the citizens. This is the idea behind the national military and local police authorities. If this is the view that the people of California hold, they will be sadly disappointed. Sanctuary state signs are popping up on California highways for the new year. Quote, felons, illegals, and MS-13, welcome, close quotes. California is announcing its desire to give refuge to criminals, illegal aliens, and dangerous gang members. Illegal immigrant women will come from far and wide. They will give birth and get benefits for themselves with their newborn American citizen babies. And on top of all of that, free health care and a driver's license will make their new place of residence especially attractive. Say hello to your new neighbors, California. Don't be troubled by the gunshots and sirens. That's to be expected. As third world diseases flood your state, just remind everyone there are free vaccines down the street. You foot the bill. Be generous. Your governor, Jerry Brown, thinks it's the right way to go. What? Yes, that's right. His full name is Jerry Moonbeam Brown. His ideas are out of this world. Unfortunately, we have to live in a world where death and taxes are very real. But do we have to welcome death and taxes? If things get really bad in California, residents can flee California and escape into Mexico. Oh, that's right. They don't tolerate any illegal immigrants from America.
The dangers of space travel are well known. Space capsules that are poorly made or made with inferior materials can prove deadly to the occupant or occupants. Re-entering the Earth's atmosphere at thousands of miles per hour can literally melt steel. A human body doesn't stand a chance.
The tragic account of the 1967 death of Russian cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov appears in a recent book titled Starman by Jamie Duran and Piers Bazzoni. The authors based their narrative mainly on information from a KGB officer, Veniamin Ivanovich Rasayev, and an earlier report by Yaroslav Golovanov. Starman tells the story of a friendship between two cosmonauts, Vladimir Komarov and Soviet space hero Yuri Gagarin, the first human to reach outer space. Gagarin is the cosmonaut who reportedly radioed Russia's bellicose leader, Nikita Khrushchev, and said, "I don't see God up here."
Gagarin and Komarov were close friends. They socialized, drank vodka, and hunted together. In 1967, both men were assigned to the same Earth-orbiting mission, and both knew the space capsule was not safe to fly. Komarov told friends he knew he would probably die, but he wouldn't back out because he didn't want Gagarin to die.
The story begins around 1967 when Leonid Brezhnev, leader of the Soviet Union, decided to stage a spectacular mid-space rendezvous between two Soviet space vehicles. It would be a triumph for the Russian space program. The plan was to launch a capsule, the Soyuz 1, with Komarov inside. The next day, a second vehicle would take off with two additional cosmonauts. The two space vehicles would meet and dock. Komarov would crawl from one vehicle to the other, exchanging places with a colleague, and come home in the second space vehicle. It would be a stunning show of Soviet technology on the 50th anniversary of the Communist Revolution. Brezhnev made it very clear he wanted this to happen.
The problem was Gagarin, already a Soviet hero, the first man ever in space. He and some senior technicians had inspected the Soyuz 1 and found 203 structural problems, serious problems, that would make the capsule unsafe. Gagarin suggested they abort the mission. Komarov said, "No, we can't."
Here's how the story ends. As anticipated, serious problems began to develop in the spacecraft. Komarov is up in space, circling the globe, convinced that he will never make it back to Earth. He's on the phone speaking to Alexei Kosygin, then a high official of the Soviet Union, who is crying. because he too knows Komarov will die a horrible death. The space vehicle is poorly constructed, nothing is working. Vladimir Komarov is about to literally crash full speed into Earth, his body turning into a blazing fireball as he enters the atmosphere. As he heads to a horrible doom, U.S. listening posts in Turkey hear him crying in rage, cursing the people who put him inside a botched spaceship, then screams and shouts, and then silence.
Indeed, there are some serious dangers to space travel. One can hardly imagine the rage that cosmonaut Komarov felt, knowing that his life meant nothing to the leaders of his own country. Then his rage turned into terror as his space capsule began to melt in the 5,000-degree heat of re-entry.
It reminds one of the dangers of traveling into eternity apart from the salvation that Jesus Christ offers. Revelation 20, verses 13 and 14 tell us that one day the sea will, quote, give up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, close quotes. Eternal salvation. Don't leave this life without it.
In a Fox News report by Todd Starnes, we read that one of America's most prestigious liberal arts colleges is advancing a queer theology agenda. It is designed to destabilize traditional beliefs about what the Bible says about gender and sexuality.
Swarthmore College, located in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, is offering courses in queering the Bible and queering God. The course description in the catalog reads this way, quote, by reading the Bible with methods of queer and trans theoretical approaches, this class destabilizes long-held assumptions about what the Bible and religion says about gender and sexuality, close quotes. The school's religion department is also teaching a class that questions the sexuality of Almighty God, called Queering God, Feminist and Queer Theology.
Dr. Robert Jeffries, the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Dallas, Texas, and also one of President Trump's spiritual advisors, warned about the spiritual dangers of twisting God's word. Quote, in suggesting that God is queer, Swarthmore College is guilty of nothing short of modern-day idolatry, close quotes. Jeffries also said, quote, when you read the Bible, you will discover that God reserved his harshest condemnation for individuals and nations that practiced idolatry, creating an imaginary God who conformed to a culture's immorality, close quotes.
The author of the Fox report, Todd Starnes, said that Swarthmore would not return his calls. Starnes wanted to ask if the religion department of Swarthmore would be offering a course on queering Muhammad or queering the Quran. Probably not. To do so would be a sure invitation for a terrorist attack.
It is sad when we see America's colleges falling into gross confusion. They are becoming madrasas of doom. Many public school teachers will surely peddle the nonsense taught them by their deluded professors. Jesus said, but whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the seas. That's from Matthew 18, verse 6. We often hear how bad things are getting into this fallen world. Well, they really are, but that's only one part of the story. As Paul Harvey used to say, and now for the rest of the story.
In 2008, Tim Keller, author of the book The Reason for God, was invited to give a talk at Google headquarters. The tech giant, like most of the denizens of the Silicon Valley, has a reputation for being progressive and, to put it mildly, somewhat hostile to Christian values. By inviting Keller to talk to its staff, Google showed an openness to Christian ideas and a willingness for a healthy dialogue. But more recently, an even more surprising guest was asked to talk to the Google staff.
Stephanie Gray is a Canadian pro-life apologist. She travels the world making the case for humanity and personhood of the unborn. Stephanie is co-founder of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform and now leads a ministry called Love Unleashes Life.
Stephanie opened her pro-life talk by comparing the story of Captain Sully Sullenberger, the man who successfully landed a disabled airliner in New York Harbor in 2009, refusing to evacuate until all his passengers were safe, with the captain of the Italian Costa Concordia ship, who quickly jumped ship after it ran aground and began to take on water. We rightly admire people like Sully, Stephanie said, because of three qualities. First of all, their willingness to sacrifice for others. Second, their perspective when faced with hardship. And third, their commitment to do the right thing, even when it means being the last one out of an airplane that is sinking in the frigid waters of New York Harbor. We live in a depraved and fallen world, but there are those who are looking for something better. The angst of the day is that it's a rotten world. But is there something better? Well, Christians have the solemn duty to lovingly challenge those around them and to show them the better way. There are still seeking souls out there, so don't give up. Be a witness for Christ, both with your words and especially with your life. Thank you, friends, for being with us on The Journey. Remember our special offer, Pastor Billy Crone's book, The Final Countdown, Volume 2. It's a good read, showing how Bible prophecy lines up with current events. I don't want to leave the impression that life is meaningless or that whatever we do is of no effect. Each one of us can make life better for someone. Something would be missing if we had never been born. The 1946 movie It's a Wonderful Life, starring Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed, has a wonderful plot. It's about a man, George Bailey, who is seriously depressed and suicidal. A friendly angel named Clarence is assigned to convince George Bailey not to commit suicide. George has been a good man who sacrificed his dreams and his youth on behalf of the citizens of his small town. The first incident that Clarence sees is that at age 12, George Bailey saved his younger brother's life in an accident on an icy pond. The angel shows what life would have been like in the little town of Bedford Falls if George Bailey had never been born. There's a lesson here for all of us. Even in this desperate time at the end of the age, each and every one of us can make a difference. We need to remember this truth, especially in the midst of winter with its darkness and gloom. We need to remember this lesson because God is still on the throne and prayer changes things.